This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We're starting this week's programming with our cattle market update provided by Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell discusses how the weather may be having impacts on moving cattle and the latest cattle on feed report. Also ahead, K-State's College of Agriculture Dean Ernie Minton joins us for January's edition of Statewide. This month's stories highlight biodegradable soil chip research, grants to support local food systems in Kansas, nanotechnology and entomology, and community mental health resilience. In this week's wildlife segment with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts, Drew provides an update on the Lesser Prairie-Chicken and resources and programs available to help with grazing program planning. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Derrell Peel. He is a livestock economist from Oklahoma State University, joining us for our cattle market report for the week. So, Derrell, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Always happy to have you over the air and all the insight that you provide. And today's conversation, I have a feeling, will be much like that. Lots to talk through and some interesting things. Not crazy changes, but just, following through with some of the trends we're seeing. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk through our markets. Kind of sluggish overall across the board. That's the word you used earlier when we were chatting. And feeder and fed cattle aren't outside of that.
No, I think that's really kind of what it is. I think there's a number of factors affecting the markets, but quite a bit of it is it's wintertime, and winter weather is having some impacts. Recently, of course, we've had some snow, some storms in some places. A lot of fed cattle country, feedlot country is muddy. And so that's probably causing some problems. And I think at the feedlots, we're probably still seeing some after effects of the December storm, which changed the timing of some cattle coming out of the feedlots. Some of the winter weather may even be impacting a little bit the movement of cattle out of feedlots to the packing plants. And so there's just been a lot of sluggishness there. Feeder cattle market's kind of the same thing. Winter weather has, sort of changed the movement of cattle out of the country. And of course, we're getting a little moisture out of the deal, so that's good. But I think, the markets are just in general struggling through some of the more or less typical kinds of winter things.
Weather is something I never even thought of. Playing into how obviously in a lot of ways, drought, we think about weather impacting our markets a lot. But I didn't even think about, winter weather, muddy conditions impacting the way cattle are being moved around. That's, something you just wouldn't think about normally.
Well, that's right. It does. Usually it's fairly short-lived, but it can change the timing of things. And obviously it impacts cattle in terms of grading and pricing when they get really muddy. It's always a challenge for the industry to have to send really muddy cattle into the packing plants and that sort of thing. So there's just a variety of impacts going on right now.
But we will not complain for any sort of precipitation. We are grateful for any and all of it.
That's for sure. We still have drought. We're still not sure what the future holds here. But, this could be the beginning of maybe some improving conditions, particularly in the middle of the country where drought is still so entrenched. So, we'll keep a good thought and work our way through this.
We'll actually carry on our conversation a little bit about the drought impacts and how that affects cattle markets here in a moment. But moving on through our markets, talking through boxed beef, a little bit of, a decrease in what we're seeing there as well, right?
The last few days, boxed beef has been, I guess I'd still call it sluggish too. It's backed up a little bit. Yeah, and we sort of anticipated that there's a, kind of a post-holiday reality check when the credit card bills come in. And again, it's winter weather, so that impacts movement of people and, certainly restaurant demand. A lot of the boxed beef strength in the last few weeks has really rested on, it appears, on the restaurant side. I think there's probably some more consumer limitations in the retail grocery side. That market's a little bit flatter. Most of the strength that we have seen through the winter coming out of the end of last year was really in the middle meats, and it was in particular with the ribs and the tenderloins, the kinds of things that feature so prominently on restaurant menus. So I think that's where that has been, and that may be struggling a little bit. Again, it could be a weather impact to some extent. Folks aren't moving around; they aren't getting out as much right now. On the other hand, Valentine's Day will be upon us here before too long. That usually prompts a little bit of steak demand. So.
Yeah, nice dinners with a loved one. That's always something to look forward to around that time of year. So hopefully that prompts movement to restaurants, like you said.
Absolutely. These wintertime restaurant markets, Valentine's is a big one. Mother's Day is a big one. That'll be a little bit farther down the road. But we'll watch these holiday markets. They're pretty important to that restaurant demand.
So now that we've kind of talked through, some of the trends in the markets that we've seen, we touched on this a little bit last week with Caitlin McCulloch out of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. She's the director with them, and she talked through a little bit of the cattle on feed report as it had recently been released. But Derrell, as you've been looking through the cattle on feed report, you're saying that really there was no big surprises, right? We kind of saw a lot of this coming.
In terms of what the numbers were in the January cattle on feed report, there weren't really any major surprises. It was pretty well anticipated. Placements were down sharply. Marketings were down sharply as well. But placements in particular, the on-feed total then continues to drop. I think that's the most important message here in some sense, is that this is the fourth month in a row of year-over-year decreases in that feedlot inventory. We anticipated it much of last year. It took a long time because of the drought, moving cattle and changing the timing of cattle moving cattle into the feedlots earlier. But once that passes, we are now, I think, pretty firmly into kind of a new situation here where we'll see these tighter supplies become more evident as we go forward.
Yeah, Caitlin mentioned just how drastic that decline might even potentially be. So looking to see how these numbers actually play out. But you said the thing that did surprise you earlier when we were chatting about the cattle on feed report was that November looks like it was our peak for our winter time frame. And that's kind of abnormal, right? And considering the yearly trends we usually follow.
It really is. If you look at feedlot numbers seasonally, they're at their lowest in the summer, and then in the fall we get yearling cattle in, we get new crop calves coming in, so we build up feedlot inventories through the fall. They usually peak anywhere from December to about February. They can be on either side of that, particularly a little bit later sometimes, but it's pretty unusual. And I noticed in December that the December total was actually a little bit lower than the November total. And so I speculated then, wow, this could be the seasonal peak. It's a little early to predict that. Well, the January total comes in slightly higher than December, but still a little bit below that November total. So it really looks more and more like maybe we did put in an early seasonal peak, and it was a lot lower than the previous peak, which was in February of 2022. So going forward, it really sets up the idea that we're going to peak at a lot lower number, and then as we pull them down seasonally, by summertime, we could really see a significantly tighter feedlot inventories as we go forward from this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Making that, I guess, feedlot world more and more challenging as we look at the months, years potentially ahead in terms of getting hands on cattle. It's going to be quite the challenge, right?
It really is. Again, 2022, the drought sort of played into their hands by forcing cattle into the feedlot sooner rather than later, but you only get to place them once. And so we put them in early. By the end of the year, it was apparent that they weren't out in the country, and I think that's going to be even more evident as we go forward. So feedlots really face, I think, significant challenges in the coming year for, across the board. There's not going to be as many feeder cattle. The cattle that are out there are going to be increasingly expensive. And, of course, cost of gain is still very expensive, and there doesn't look like any immediate relief in that, certainly not through the rest of this crop marketing year. So I think feedlots are going to face a lot of challenges going forward in terms of the way their margins potentially can work out. Now, obviously, fed cattle prices at some point should go up and help offset some of that on the input side. But the nature of what we're into right now is all the squeeze is coming from the bottom up. And so it takes time and for the output side, from a feedlot perspective, to adjust. So there will be a period of time, I think, where the margins will be pretty tough for these feedlots.
Yeah, a tough time for them for sure. And we're not even sure if we're out of the tunnel yet when it comes to liquidation. When we think about the numbers that we actually have in the U.S. of cattle, the options out there for these feedlot producers to, get their hands on. And we've talked about the drought and it's ongoing, and we've gotten precipitation, and it looks like we may be slowly easing out of this drought scenario, very slowly being keyword here. But the effects of this winter being so hard on people with little hay and forage content to actually graze these animals on, we might still see some liquidation here, right?
Absolutely. From a cow-calf perspective out in the country, again, hay supplies were limited. The December, hay stocks data confirmed that we have extremely tight hay stocks. We've had significant winter storms in some cases, which has forced these producers to tap into those limited supplies, perhaps faster than they anticipated. So, all of that said, we've got a lot of wintertime ahead of us to get through. I think some folks are still facing some decisions there. And then, of course, depending on what the drought does, as we get into spring, obviously, if drought conditions don't improve, then we could still be looking at additional liquidation for lack of future forage production. And now, the cattle numbers will continue to tighten simply because we've already moved a lot of them. So I think the drought could still change the timing of what we have, but what we have is less cattle going forward. And so in any event, back to the feedlot side, they're going to struggle to find animal numbers. If we continue to liquidate, they'll get a few more than they would otherwise a little bit sooner. But it just means that longer term, the supplies get even tighter then. And so there's a lot of question marks ahead of us between now and, springtime here as we look forward to what the next growing season is going to bring for us.
And, the saying goes, I guess, April showers bring May flowers, but I have a feeling I'm not the only one that's hoping April showers bring green pastures for May. So here's hoping that this long winter doesn't seem as long as it might feel.
Well, that's right. I mean, it would be nice if we, obviously we don't have any assurance yet that we're going to see drought conditions improve. And it would be a double bonus if we actually had an early spring in some sense and we started getting that moisture sooner, warming up a little sooner, and getting those pastures going because, again, we're going to be facing some touch and go kind of situation for a lot of producers in terms of having the hay supplies to get through the winter.
Well, Derrell, I can't thank you enough. Like I said, I knew this was going to be an engaging conversation. It always is, but I can't thank you enough for all the insight you provided today.
You bet. I'm happy to anytime.
Much appreciated. Once again, everyone, that was Derrell Peel. He is a livestock economist from Oklahoma State University, joining us for this week's cattle market update. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Dean Ernie Minton. He is the Dean of K-State's College of Agriculture, and he's joining us for this month's edition of Statewide. So if you're not familiar, every month, Dean Minton and his team helps put together a newsletter of the latest happenings in the College of Agriculture here at K-State. And this month, Dean Minton, we've got some great stories to cover.
Yes, we do, and looking forward to sharing those with you and your listeners, Samantha.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to have you here, and like you said, let's get right into these amazing stories. So first and foremost, we've got biodegradable soil moisture sensors with Dr. Raj Khosla. He's our precision agronomist, I guess you could say, for Extension, and some excellent work that he's doing. He's talked about it here on the show before, but really exciting research.
Absolutely, yeah. Raj is, I was getting ready to say, relatively new, and I suppose it is in the big scheme. But he's been department head of agronomy, but also for over 2 years now. And actually, now that I speak about that, he may be coming up on his third year. But regardless, he also maintained a small but active research appointment and brought with him a good deal of experience in precision agriculture. And just if I could add a little bit. Part of K-State's Economic Prosperity Plan is a theme called Digital Agriculture and Advanced Analytics, and that's really what this story is about. It's going to be a real focus, yes, of the College of Agriculture, but this is a multidisciplinary field, and this story fits right underneath that topic really very, very well. The story actually is really very interesting about the application of biodegradable sensors that may be becoming part of precision agriculture in the very near future. And this is a story I think your listeners will find very, very interesting, but it'll also give them some sense of where the technology is moving and the innovation is coming with regard to precision agriculture. It's easy to think of things like auto steer, GPS guidance, etc. Those have been around a while, but precision application aided by a high-density set of wireless sensors, as is described in this particular piece, is really intriguing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some very, very, outside of the box thinking went into this research. And as it continues to grow and change and evolve with time, as all research does, it'll be incredible to follow along and watch. So listeners, if you're looking for more information on that, I'll be sure to link to that article and all the others we're about to discuss in today's show notes, which can be found on agtoday.net. But Dean Minton, this next one is also an incredibly important story when we think about tying into our Kansas communities. And K-State recently received a grant, a very large grant, to help support local food systems in Kansas. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, Samantha, this is a nice grant. It has a lot of extension professionals involved in the work and is primarily, an extension-related grant to deliver programming. And it's all around, local food systems and making them really more effective. The story quotes and cites a number of extension professionals who are, kind of sprinkled throughout the state and have various roles in the work itself. And the work is designed to pull together these teams, evidently in 2019. And I had to be reminded of this. There's a local foods transdisciplinary team that was pulled together. And this really builds on that. They intend to help build local partnerships with local producers, hosting local food summits, and the team plans training for farms and businesses on marketing and sales option, and also to create a consumer education campaign as well. I think the story does a good job pointing out that, we think of Kansas, and it's really accurate, as a very important among the states in the U.S. Agricultural state, but that doesn't mean that all the citizens, wherever they may be located, particularly in rural areas, have access to all of the healthy foods they need. And this grant really kind of focuses in on that problem. And as Londa Nowadiki, one of our extension specialists, food safety specialists, notes, this also includes the business of trying to tackle the problem of food waste. So it's really kind of comprehensive, very interesting program. I think your listeners will enjoy reading about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you mentioned this is a big team effort. And whenever we think of extension, I feel like that's the story a lot of the time, is that it takes a village for a lot of these big programs that we put together. But it also means that there's so many different thoughts and ideas, so much collaborative learning that's going on. And I think that's really another part of the beauty of that story for sure.
Right.
Absolutely. So our next story is one that I recently covered as well. It's nanotechnology to help aid entomology research here at K-State. Jeff Whitworth, our crop pest entomologist that we commonly hear from here on Ag Today, he recently got into the world of nanotechnology, and to help him do that, he brought on Dr. Amy Norton, who is a nanotechnologist, and she's done plenty of research in this field. But it's really exciting that this new field of research and this new lab is really getting started here at K-State.
Yeah, it is a really fascinating story. And, the concept of nanotechnology and nanoparticles and so on have been around actually for quite a while. And they've had applications in just a wide variety of sectors. And the piece that's in Statewide points that out. Delivery of medicines, consumer products, materials and manufacturing. But in this particular case, I think this team is going to provide some interesting research on how nanotechnology and nanoparticles can be used to deliver pesticides and other elements of crop pest management. And, I think the aim is really, again, this is really part of that broader question of precision agriculture, delivering the right amount at the right time in the right place, at the right concentration, etc. So what this nanotechnology is hoped to provide is an opportunity to provide more effective pest control using less pesticide in the process. So this could be some really, really exciting research, and we're looking forward to the results of that research being reported in the next few years.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was speaking with Jeff and Amy about this new lab that they're putting together. And, with labs come graduate students. And they were very excited about the prospect of having some very bright and interested graduate students in this field. And what an opportunity to become, an expert in such a new and niche area. What a cool chance for those students that they bring on.
Well, absolutely. And, just to that point, that just says that that's another thing that, of course, K-State Research and Extension is about, and that is training the next generation of entomologists. And here it points out there's an opportunity for students to become involved in really what could be some groundbreaking research that can go into their thesis and or dissertation research and, help move the field forward. So, another just an example of bringing together the key mission areas of K-State Research and Extension from an education, research, and extension outreach perspective.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And this last story of ours is on community wellness following, obviously, the global pandemic. We still have, things that are not completely resolved. When we think about 2020 and 2021, the community effects are still being felt to this day. Elaine Johannes from K-State, she has recently been big on speaking about community vitality following after this.
Yeah, that's right. For those of the listeners who may not know, Elaine, she's the Kansas Health Foundation Distinguished Professor of Community Health at K-State, and she's been part of K-State Research and Extension for a number of years. And interesting story here about not forgetting the local community with regard to mental health and well-being, particularly on the backside, hopefully, of the pandemic. I think the interesting thing that Elaine points out is people, when they think about a community, they may be thinking about a city, a county, or a township. And Elaine points out in this piece that we're really talking about smaller communities of friends, colleagues, and even a part of a faith community that can help spot and identify and raise up mental health issues of individuals who are part of that smaller community. And she makes the point that it's really important, to check in with one another with regard to how those local communities can respond to mental health issues, and that also tying in K-State Research and Extension to that, and making the point that local extension personnel are part of a resource that is available for those local communities. And so I think this is a nice piece, and people will enjoy taking a read at that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Critical area for sure when we think about, the mental health sphere of not only rural communities, not only Kansas, but of the United States in general. I feel like this is a trend that's going on. It's just being mindful of those in your life that you care for and that are a part of your day-to-day activities and just, checking in with each other. Always a great reminder for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, Dean Minton, like I said, these were some great stories that we've discussed today, and they're a part of our statewide January newsletter that goes out. There's one for every month of the year. And I know listeners, if they're tuning in and they're wanting to learn more about these stories, like I said, I'll be linking to them on our show notes, which can be found on agtoday.net, as well as some of our Ag Today stories that coincide with these stories. So if you're interested in learning more and checking these out, be sure to do that there. But Dean Minton, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Good to visit with you again.
Absolutely. You as well. Once again, everyone, that was Dean of K-State's College of Agriculture, Dean Ernie Minton, joining us for this month's Statewide. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Drew Ricketts. He is our K-State wildlife specialist. So, Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Samantha.
Absolutely. So today you wanted to do a bit of a follow-up on our big Lesser Prairie-Chicken story, which we kind of figured would happen.
Yeah. So I think the day that this story came out, the Fish and Wildlife Service decided to extend the period that's going to elapse before the protections under the threatened status of the prairie chicken actually go into effect.
There's a bit of a lagging period for comments whenever stuff like this is announced anyways, but this is just a further pause. So our date now is going to be what?
The new date is March 27th, and the last time we talked about this, we should have talked about when all of this was going to go into effect, and we were so worried about the other details that we left that out. And typically what happens is when a rule is published like this, there's a 60-day comment period where people can raise a stink about something or those sorts of things. And so we've used up that first 60 days, and it's now been extended by another 60 days. But there's no comments being allowed during this new 60-day extension.
Sure, just a time for people to get their grazing plans put in place, maybe get approved as a certified grazing plan person in the meantime.
Yeah, and it's also, I think one of the main reasons that this extension has occurred is to give organizations and individuals time to get their ducks in a row to decide if they're going to be developers of those plans and all those sorts of things.
Good to know for sure. And the rest of our conversation today is going to focus on programs that are available to help with putting those plans in place or getting ready to. So let's talk through those.
Yeah, so I tend to call these habitat enhancement plans, but they're basically government programs that provide financial assistance for lots of different things that are good for farmers and ranchers, and some of those things are practices that help maintain or develop wildlife habitat. So the Natural Resource Conservation Service has a program called EQIP that a lot of folks are probably familiar with, and EQIP provides a nice opportunity for folks who have expired CRP. You know, a lot of times that expired CRP does not have a water source on it, and one of the main things that folks like to use that grassland for is grazing, and without a water source, it's really hard to put cattle on there. So NRCS has some cost share for, we call them livestock pipelines, that would add a water source there. NRCS under EQIP, and then another program that's wildlife focused called Working Lands for Wildlife will also cost share tree removal. We talked about how important trees are for reducing lesser prairie-chicken habitat. Also prescribed fire, installing fire breaks so that we can conduct safe fires. And in addition to that, they would also help with developing grazing prescriptions that will help use cattle as a tool to create nesting cover and to create brood rearing cover as well.
Wonderful. Well, great programs for sure to check out through EQIP, and then the Working Lands for Wildlife program also through them as well. So great to know about. And I know there's also some further partners, obviously, to talk through. The Partners for Fish and Wildlife, that's another group.
Yeah, so the Partners for Fish and Wildlife is sort of the private lands wildlife management piece of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And their program is really flexible. It's designed to work with producers to help remove trees from rangelands. That's one of their main focuses in Kansas. And the lesser prairie-chicken is one of their target species. They're also going to encourage some prescribed fire on the properties that they work on as well. These can be very large contracts. There can be a lot of tree removal money included in those when Partners for Fish and Wildlife has a budget to work with. And then sort of the last program that we'll talk about is the Habitat First program through Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. So, sometimes when we think about facilitators of these programs, we've got the federal government and then we've got the state government. Sometimes folks are more comfortable with working with local partners. And so Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks has the Habitat First program. It's going to be a smaller pot of money, but we can have multiple annual contracts from year to year for the same sort of work. So we can still get quite a bit of tree removal, prescribed fire, and then some programs for ag land that would help produce or create lesser prairie-chicken habitat out in some croplands that would also be good for pheasants and quail too.
So, Drew, we've listed a lot of programs here, but I know sometimes folks are like, I just need a link to learn more. So we'll link to all of these resources in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. But as always, Drew, thanks for the update.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Samantha. I always enjoy this.
Once again, that was K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts joining us for this week's Wildlife Update. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more tomorrow on Agriculture Today.